Hello, everyone. So today I want to share with you my thoughts on how buildings have evolved and where we need to go in the future. So let me share this with you. Okay, so here we come to a little bit of building history by a building scientist. And here in the upper corner, you see two scales. One is for health risks in the building. Okay, so this goes from low risk via moderate risk to high and very high risk. So this means that our indoor environment isn't healthy for the occupants and that there could be severe consequences living in that environment. Then the second scale is for our comfort. Okay, so how comfortable we are in our buildings, from very comfortable through to extreme discomfort. So let's see where our buildings have brought us. Okay, so in the beginning, we were building shelters, like a little shelter, maybe a cave, maybe just some sticks and some leaves on top, something like that. At least kept the rain out, but we were still extreme uncomfortable in there. All the external conditions would just get to us still. And but the risk in that shelter was very low because our air was still pretty much outdoor air. The next step was to then heat this shelter, to put a little fire into it, into our cave or into our little hut. And the discomfort decreased, but our health risk now increased because now we had all that smoke in there, but still a lot of ventilation. So not really a big problem. Now let's look what was done next. So next was to enclose that shelter even more, to protect us even more from the elements, from the wind, from the rain. And that made this shelter more comfortable, but also increased our risk of being in there. Our health risk became bigger. Now, the next logical thing was to tighten up that building envelope even more. So we put some kind of external protection around it, our weather tightness, so-called weather tightness, made it really safe from our drafts and wind and rain. And that made sure that we became more comfortable, but now our risk is really high. We're having still an open fire in here, like an open cooking spot or an open fire. And all that toxic smoke was in there. And now we enclosed ourselves and there was not so much fresh air movement. And the risk inside that building became a lot higher. When we added insulation to that, which made our comfort even better, we are now at a really high risk level of being very, very unhealthy in that building. Or the next step that we did, that was to replace our open fire with a radiator or like a different kind of heating system. So we took away that open source of fire, which made the risk level lower. Okay, so now we didn't have that smoke inside our buildings. This was run. This is now our typical radiator, maybe a water-based or oil-based system. And our comfort levels are pretty good in there now. But still, we have a bit of a risk because we still don't have consistent ventilation in here. Then we added air tightness, because this step needed to happen so that we are eliminating even more drafts and that we're eliminating energy losses through our thermal envelope. And I believe this is the step where a lot of buildings are stuck at the moment. So everything else was an involvement over years and years, maybe over decades and decades. But now I feel that this is the stage where we're stuck in. We're making our buildings more airtight. We still need some kind of external conditioning to keep our indoor environment comfortable. That can be a radiator, that could be our split system aircon, but we're not really looking after ventilating our buildings properly. So our comfort is pretty good in here, but our risk is still relatively high because of the missing ventilation. So we don't have fresh air all the time. So we could have raised CO2 levels, we could have mold risks, things like that can happen if we don't have proper ventilation. So the next thing that I think needs to happen, and probably happens already and definitely happens already when you're looking into the Passivhaus standard, is that we need to look at mechanical ventilation. So once we bring that in, our comfort is really high and our risk is really low because we have now our constant ventilation that exchanges our air 24/7. We've got nice fresh air. We don't have elevated CO2 levels. Our toxins are taken away and our moisture levels staying at a good level. And the last step we can still do is we can then take away our external conditioning system, and we could provide our heating and cooling via our ventilation system as well. That's what Passivhaus is doing, and this would be your most comfortable and low risk level, and that's, I think, where all the buildings need to go to. So what is our vision? Our vision here at Smart Plus Academy. So as I just told you, we are able to build a shelter, and we are able to make that shelter structurally sound. That shelter protects us from the elements. So this is where we're already at. Yeah. So the protection from elements, from the wind, from the rain, from the temperatures, we are okay with that. Even though sometimes there's still problems with, sort of heat and cold still coming through our building envelope. But what needs to be the next step? So the next step needs to be, as I said before, we need to look at a healthy indoor air. And that's what Passivhaus can give us. We also need to look at a comfortable indoor environment, because we're not always doing that yet in our buildings. We're not always comfortable. I'm definitely not always comfortable. We need to look at sustainable buildings. If we're looking forward, and if we're looking at the problem of climate change, what's happening in our world, we definitely need to look into sustainability. And obviously we want our buildings economical as well, so that as many people as possible can afford them. And all of that, the beauty is that all of these 4 next steps can be provided by Passivhaus. So Passivhaus is the first step after where we're stuck at in the building industry right now, because I feel that we are a bit stuck. We need to take that big first step into the right direction, which is Passivhaus, which is our first step. Bring the energy, reduce our energy consumption, make the buildings energy efficient. And that's our first step to getting a healthy, comfortable, and sustainable home. Now, there's more steps that we should do after that. But before we haven't tackled this step, we can't go to the next step. And the next step should be that our buildings become our energy producers, that we can store the energy that's produced from our buildings to use it for other things that we may need, that our buildings become zero energy buildings and real zero energy buildings over a whole lifetime. So we're taking into account the embodied energy, we're taking a whole life cycle assessment, and then becoming into smart buildings and plus energy buildings, where the buildings become the power stations of the future. And we're calling that the Smart Plus building standard. That's what we all should aim for in the future. And we feel that, or I feel strongly that, the building industry needs to make that next step into the right direction, and pretty soon, because buildings are so impactful that we can't wait. So thank you very much for listening to me. And I really hope that resonated with you. So let's take the next step forward into the right direction. So remember, Passivhaus is the first step. After we've tackled Passivhaus, we can then do more and more and more. But let's not get stuck in this phase where we're at. Let's take the next step and create healthy, comfortable, and sustainable buildings that are affordable.